Welcome to the Funnel Reboot Podcast, brought to you by Marketing What's New. Let's get into today's show.
Hey, Glenn here, and I am glad that you are here for this episode of Funnel Reboot, because we're continuing our summer book series. And this time, we're going to be talking about something revenue related. So, what does your company do? This is a simple question. It should have a simple answer. Yet whenever I'm asked it, I feel the tug to drift into a talk track just full of feature dump. This and other sales sins lead to situations that ultimately lose potential sales. And they put all of marketing's hard work at risk of going to waste. The meticulously crafted content, the research on ICPs, intent-based campaigns that are aimed at key accounts, that can all be for naught if sales doesn't have a good game plan for their conversations with the prospect. It's at this point that companies seek the help of our guest. After getting his Ph.D. at Stanford, our guest spent 10 years as a social scientist at the Rand Corporation. While he liked using his academic training, he looked for places his knowledge could be more practically applied. Jumping to enterprise and early stage companies, he found gaps in their revenue function. He also found he could get sales teams unstuck from specific challenges with a little bit of old-fashioned theoretical modeling. After more than a decade of experience as a revenue leader, he founded Winalytics, a go-to-market and revenue consultancy whose clients have included DealerRater, Lexmark, and Ascend Learning. He continued developing his list of situations and modeled plays, and that led to the publishing of his collection, the Revenue Acceleration Playbook, which he came out with in 2022. We'll now go and hear from Brent Keltner.
I'm really glad to welcome Brent Keltner. Welcome to the show, Brent.
Hey, it's so good to be with you today, Glenn.
Thank you. Can you please tell us the name of the book that you recently wrote?
It is called the Revenue Acceleration Playbook.
And the subtitle?
Is called Creating an Authentic Buyer Journey Across Sales, Marketing, and Customer Success.
Right. And we want to eventually cover all three of those groups, but let's maybe imagine for the near term that we're thinking about how something ends up getting sold. And of course, it has to begin with marketing. One of the things that I want to first focus on is how you feel we aren't doing such a great job of articulating the products or the service offerings that we have in a way that's going to let the buyer quickly grasp what it can do for them and why it's good. Could you maybe tell me where you lay the blame for that? What is the problem in a nutshell as you see it?
Yeah, and you said it begins with marketing, and that's completely true from an organizational perspective, but it really begins with buyer value. If your buyers don't perceive something valuable, they could care less about your product, what's in it for them.
Yes.
And they have to get that really quickly. And so what's happened is, at a time when the internet exploded and buyers could get exactly what they were looking for about you, your competitors, peer review sites, and expected, Salesforce just came out with a study that 70% of B2B buyers expect the same level of personalization as B2C. So they expect a very high level of personalization. And rather than getting good at personalizing value, marketing teams have gotten good at content production for its own sake, right? Always got to have something new. And they've gotten good at measuring stuff. And what they're not doing as well is positioning value to buyers based on their role, based on their goal or what they're trying to accomplish, and based on their market segment. That's how buyers perceive value. I'm in a role, I got certain problems, I want to hear from other role peers. I got a certain goal I'm trying to achieve, whether it's driving revenue, reducing costs, building engagement, getting my recruits to convert each stage of the pipeline, whatever your goal is, they want to hear how you solve a goal. in a role. And then look, everybody, like, we care about segment peers. Manufacturing company does not care about a financial services company generally. So
Right. They have their own business to think about.
They have their own business to think about.
And yet, I mean, this sometimes I think this could be considered maybe a sin of commission, because marketers are good at producing content. Marketers, especially if you have anything that is technical, are more than happy to dig deep with the product team, get a lot of information, specifications, feeds and speeds, perhaps even, put them in a nice package that goes on the website or goes into white papers or goes out through channel sales. But you're telling me that just throwing that stuff at the buyer isn't helping our cause.
That's right. Think about less content and content that is aligned to a value story, a story about buyer value.
Yeah, you call them value narratives.
The value narratives, stories about buyer value. The Demand Gen Institute did a study in 2019, which basically said, 85% of teams were producing more content. Only 30% had the idea of a buyer journey in that content.
Right. So you're littering. You're basically just expecting them to go through this mess and find out where they could get value.
Yep. And for your listeners, they're not going to do it. For your listeners, that's a challenge, but it's also a huge opportunity to differentiate yourself from 70% of the companies out there. If you make it easy, as you said, Glenn, if you make it easy for your buyers to understand value early on. And one question we always ask client companies or prospects or whatever is, can your buyers, based on their role, goal, and segment, can they see themselves on your website?
Right.
And if they can't see themselves on your website, chances are you don't have the content for your sales and prospecting and success team to speak to them based on their role, goal. And so it's a very simple auditing technique. I was working with a company yesterday, done a great job on the segments.
Yes.
Have no use case to speak of for the 6 different personas they serve.
Right. So that's, I think, an element that helps to let somebody really inventory is this user story. So tell us a little bit about how even within the buying organization, you're going to have several different levels, and each one of them has a story, and they need that story satisfied before they're willing to vote at the buying committee for you.
Yep.
What does that look like?
Yeah, let's take the example, if you remember from the book, of Torchlight, which is a caregiver platform. And, more than 50% of employees now have caregiver responsibilities at both ends, the sandwich generation, so their kids and their parents.
Yep.
It falls particularly heavily on women, right? Disproportionately. So big barrier to their retention or progression into management. If you think about the buyers that are going to think about that, it's like you have an HR benefits person that says, how are people going to use this? Are my employees going to use this? Is it easy for them? Do they care? You've got somebody on the HR tech that's saying, hey, how does it fit into all the other tools? How does it integrate? You've got somebody who's more of an economic buyer saying, why am I investing in this? Is it going to help with recruitment and retention? So you have different personas that care about that platform in different ways. But then as you think about one of the things they learned, and we did some work with them, is, in financial services, that priority on kind of female leadership career paths, hugely important, recruiting and retention of those individuals. In a manufacturing sector, much less so, mostly men on the shop floor. And what they want to know is, does this keep people on task more? So the segment value prop, same exact platform, but the way you message value is based on the role and based on the goals, and those can vary by segment.
Yes. And if we kind of imagined down at a individual level, like a sales conversation would have, and I can imagine that people are saying, okay, well, once I know the gender of the person. I'm just going to, read from my script on what their persona is, and I'm going to tell them that I know what their problem is, and I'm just going to start then, building value on that. You say that is totally the wrong idea. You instead encourage us to listen and not be so prescriptive. So can you tell me a little bit about, we may end up at understanding that, the female leadership category likes these kind of things, and the shop people like the other, but you don't expect us to go charging in and say that we know that stuff. Like, let's say maybe people in the past, like Neil Rackham would have said.
Yeah. So the phrase we always use, you've probably heard, is telling is not selling. And telling is not selling. The human brain is not wired to be told. When you tell somebody something, defense mechanisms automatically go up.
Yeah.
There's a guy named Todd Capone who's written a book called The Transparency Sale that turns us into a sales approach. We have an approach as well. It's a great book, but to your point, if we have to pronounce something to somebody, chances are we're on the downhill. Whereas if we guide them to saying it themselves, boom, the amount of energy that's just unlocked with just simple questions on, curious if you know, let's take Torchlight, curious if you know currently, like, what percentage of your women have caregiver responsibilities for both their parents and their children.
Yes.
And if you thought about how are you currently serving that population? And if you thought about, are they being inhibited from taking the next step in their career because of the burden of that, right? So we're trying to get them to tell us what would get them excited about working with us. We call it a success statement. And if they say it, you are winning. If you say it, it's neutral to negative.
Really?
So guided discovery is you're just trying to get them to tell you, and this is in Neil Rackham. I actually am a huge Neil Rackham fan. You don't have time for all of his questions in the current environment. You got to get to impact much quicker, but huge fan is this idea of you guide somebody to what's the implication of their pain and how you can help them, right?
Yeah. Do you think, given how much happens remotely now, that a marketer might be able to, just in the way that they're writing content, be able to leave out just a little bit of the answer or pause in how they're delivering the content so that in the mind of the buyer, there's space for that question to float?
Yeah, love that direction. We encourage you in your website, in your prospecting sequences, in your marketing sequences, ask questions, right? Ask provocative questions to get somebody to think is one. The other thing, I've never worked with a marketing team that didn't have opportunity to do better stories.
Right.
Marketing often thinks of case studies that are nice and glossy on the website, and that's awesome. That's a hero asset that a CFO or a CEO might read. But honestly, just simple stories or snippets, things that sort of they see themselves, peers, short video, short quote. The more you can tell your story of your impact through your store, through your customers and your customer voice, the more engagement you're going to win from your buyers. Because if you think about it, a customer story it's different than any other asset in one very simple way. It shifts the conversation from you and me to we that are peers trying to solve a common problem. It's the only type of collateral asset that builds that peer connection.
Yeah. And just like whenever we read fiction, we're picturing ourselves as the character. Great
example. Yep.
So I guess even slowing down, not, and I mean in an individual, piece of content, just not trying so hard to portray the company as having all the answers and that we're in a rush to close them or to get them to become a lead. It takes a little bit more repose, a little bit more, all right, do you feel like your objective would be served by looking at this kind of solution, right? And kind of giving them the chance to say that. Your contention is if you get them to say that, then they're going to soldier through right to the close with you, and you'll both have spent better use of your time.
Much. I mean, look, we lose a ton in selling, right?
It's wasteful. Yeah.
It's frictional, but the idea of what you just said, the sooner we get them to tell, we say everybody in sales or even in customer success should have some type of success or impact question. If we were to work together on that initiative around your employee retention, what would success look like for you? A guy question, maybe more. What would the touchdown dance be for you? If we were to work together, what would the touchdown dance be in 6 months? A girl question might be more. If I were to wave a magic wand, I actually know sellers that ask us, if I were to wave a magic wand, what would the ideal situation be in 6 months? Getting your buyer to envision that more successful future is the key to deal velocity. And what I would say is if you probe on that and people can't envision it, you're probably wasting your time.
So I'm playing a hunch here, but I think that's why you insert some partitions in the way that we are going through these stories. You talk about 3 phases. There's insights for early discovery, tailoring for active evaluation, and then expertise for decision making. So am I right that you're breaking it down so that we don't get ahead of them, that we bring them through the process in the way they want to be sold to?
Great instinct. If you think about that first phase, we're just trying to get them to raise their hand and say, I'm interested. Yeah. I'm going to download some of your white papers. I'm going to read some of your blogs. I'm going to engage, right? I'm interested. I'll spend time with you. That middle phase, ideally, they're saying, hey, tell me more about how you've worked with somebody like us. Or tell me how you solved this kind of problem, right, that we just talked about. So they're trying to work with us to say, okay, build evidence because I'm going to have to convince my team, right? And at the end, usually it's like, hey, and what do you got for my CEO or my CFO who are never going to get on a call with you, but I want to improve how impressive you guys are, either through referrals or a white paper or speaking that your CEO has done. Give me something that really shows you guys are it. And so we have to pace the content levels to let them take a step so we can spend our time with the people that are moving forward with us.
Yeah. And what the thread that I love that runs through that is stories, because if we have done our job properly in the early stages, so I would imagine the first one is maybe to help narrow it down to just the people who would be, would find our message resonates. But the story we're sharing with, let's say, our proponent, our champion, not only is going to help them convince themselves, but they will also inevitably have to talk to that CFO or CEO. And it would really be great to arm them with the material to help them tell that story.
That's exactly right. And if you're selling to a CFO, Torchlight, go back to that example, you're selling to a CFO of a manufacturing company, going to be a lot more interested in a story about another manufacturing company than a investment bank.
Right. So the story is
needed. So that personalization of the story, or if the use case is around time on task, okay, maybe you have a story from Dell, but it's really about, hey, we let workers on the line spend more time on task.
Yeah, for sure. All right, we're going to come to a little bit more about how sometimes our organizations get too siloed or too fixated with our reporting mechanisms, but we're going to take a quick break before we do that.
I'm breaking away for a moment, and I want to remind you of some free ways that you can help get the most out of it. You can keep up to date via social media. Take your pick of Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn. We're on all of them. If you want to be notified of new episodes, visit funnelreboot.com. It'll give you a form for being emailed when each new show is out. Our website also has links to many of the podcast apps we're found on. And once you pull up the show on your app, I'd love you to subscribe to it. Lastly, if you know someone else who'd get value out of this content, please share the show's URL with them so they can do the same. Now let's get back to the show.
Okay, Brent, we were just talking about how we need to have stories, and we need to make sure that we're, even on a marketing or a sales level, being able to graft on the ways that we've delivered success with past customers so that a prospective customer can get it. Can you tell me, are you, like me, angered by people who get a little bit too fixated with a number, like the number of marketing qualified leads that we had to post last month, or the number of proposals that we're putting in? I think you share my same hatred for people who glom onto that, because I think they mail it in. And what I mean by that is, you can always report numbers, and you can do it in a genuine way or not. But I don't think there's many people that can actually mail in a story. When you're talking to someone and you're really finding out what they need, and I'm thinking of an episode you talked about when you were buying a condo, and you found a rep, a realtor who really cared about your needs. That can't be faked. So tell me a bit more about the difference between, faking it and really doing what's needed to get the story.
Yeah, and if you take that story I was just transitioning into my time at Kaplan, which was going from being an academic to the business world, and had this experience. I had learned to run authentic conversations at Rand as a qualitative researcher. We're all about anchoring on the other person. And so I got to this, moved to Boston, moved my life across the country. And I can remember the first realtor I worked with, it was just like working from a spec sheet. We're just hoofing through one condo after another. Is a new kitchen? Does it have a hardwood floor?
Right.
Where's it? And I just can remember thinking, she's lost the plot on what I care about. She's just going to throw a bunch of stuff at me and see if anything sticks. And after a while, I was like, this is not working for me. And so I put it on hold. And the next story, it was Elise, right? Was a realtor's name, which is a pseudonym, but an actual person that really had a much more thoughtful, hey, tell me like your best living situations, right? What was good about them? What'd you like? What didn't you like? And then after every visit, we just debrief a little bit. Like, how are we tracking? So her whole goal of every interaction was to learn more about what would make me feel successful in my condo search.
Yeah. And like you highlight there that we can, maybe win the battle but lose the war. The first realtor was no doubt showing ones that were within the square footage, with the requisite number of, accessories and, rooms and bathrooms. But yet they were missing some of the things that would actually matter to you. And you talked about how, you would get into a place and say, it kind of ticks the boxes, but I could never see myself here. I can't imagine on a Saturday afternoon that I would want to get out from here and go for a walk. There's, it doesn't really fit what I'm going for. But she never took the time to learn that.
Never took the time to check in. And I think this is a thing we forget in our sales and customer success conversations, is that ultimately your buyers, things change. Their priorities change. New people come into the conversation. So always re-anchoring on why the heck are they talking to you at all before we get into our product is you will just win more. If beginning of every conversation, hey, this is what I understood from our last conversation. So in this, hey, last week we went out to these 3 condos and you like this one the best because, is that still how you're feeling about it? Has anything come up, right? So this practice of just when we think about our sales interactions, our customer success interactions, always just coming back to your buyer or customer why. Why are they talking to you? What will get them excited? What does success mean to them? It will you will just be more successful quicker.
I'll latch onto that quicker part because let's imagine that you are receiving all this stuff spoon-fed by, a marketing team. Maybe they're even, doing their very best. But if you aren't getting this stuff out to do its seed trials, you're not actually trying some of the similar stories on a customer or probing them to see if in your mind you can think of something like a customer success story in the inventory that fits their need. How long are you going to go before you realize that, your marketing content is out of whack with your customers, or that you're missing whole pockets of your customer base when they're right in front of you telling you what they want?
Yeah, it's a great point. And I agree with you that there's a lot of teams that just track metrics, like a bizarre number of metrics, and it's just a blur, right? We're reporting to report and there's not any value. We often encourage you agree on a smaller number of net within a team, marketing, sales, but then marketing to sales, smaller number of metrics that are really the purpose is learning metrics, right? If we can learn and get better, that's worth measuring, but it's not about reporting for its own sake. And so one of the things we encourage, marketing teams to do, you just said it, is you have to start to think of content consumption as a qualifier, right? You have to start looking at your kinds of content and the intensity of content and, how is content being forwarded around as a qualifier for readiness. And often we just serve up content and we measure clicks and stuff. And we aren't really saying, I don't have a measure of, okay, they're getting readier, right? They're going deeper with our content. They're consuming more content. They're forwarding it to other people within their organization. But content is a huge indicator of readiness, both before the sales process and in the sales process.
I agree. In one part of the book that I think we've all got to get comfortable with, but I must admit I'm not personally comfortable with it, is that you're saying we've got to let go of scripts or, in some cases, fully fleshed out pieces of content and take the questions kind of to their ultimate end, where you yourself don't know the answer, where you yourself are wondering, you kind of in that childlike way. Well, how do you do that? Or what do you do when your boss says they want this and you just can't provide it in the time required? Like, how would you do that? I think we've got to get into those fiercely honest questions, and we got to have some of them ready. I think that allows both of us, just like a story allows us, to just lose the starch, and now we're just two humans talking.
Yeah, look, and I think to your point, people sense that authenticity, right? That I'm not looking to sell you anything you don't want. I'm just looking to see if there's a fit here.
Yeah.
And if you come at it from that posture, you get a ton of points. And we encourage people to be radical, kind of transparent and honest in their language. Like, I just want to stop and ask directly, are you seeing value here? Should we continue the conversation? Why? And there's this huge relief, right? It's like, okay, they really want to have a conversation with me. They don't want to just shove something down my throat because they spent the time to get here. So I think that transparency and honesty, looking right for a fit, you actually sell more, right? Than the opposite.
Ironically, yes. And yet it's completely impossible to do that if either in marketing or sales, in the back of your mind, you're trying to hit a metric.
Yeah. Yep.
Because you just won't allow yourself to ask those, what are we doing here questions, or are we right in your particular instance here? But it serves everybody better if you do ask them.
Yeah, 100%.
So from a management tier, and I know we're going to talk a little bit more about how we move up in the organizations. And if we're talking B2B, we're in fairly large organizations. Does this mean that managers have to put the reports down for a bit and actually act more like coaches?
Yes, and they need to. Both sides need to use the sort of the coach is. I want to learn together, right? How you can be more successful. That's why we're tracking this stuff. But let's spend some time like actually thinking about what is the data saying about what your gaps and weaknesses are that you can get better about. I think the other thing we encourage internal conversations that are transparent. There was one company we worked with that every 6 months does I'm drawing a blank on the name now, but it's essentially it's called a stay interview, right? Between a manager and an employee, that basically the manager is meant to think, if this person were to walk out tomorrow, would I fight for them? Is there still a good role on their team? And the employee is meant to think about, am I still committed to being here? And if so, what do I want to do over the next 6 months? Right. So the whole point is just look, it's a fluid world, but if we're transparent with each other about, and respectful about how we use our time together, it leads to a much better outcome for everybody. So yes, need to be a coach, but need to be collaborative in that, my goal is to make you more successful. You need to commit to that as the individual producer, to wanting to be more successful. How can we figure that out together? And what are we going to do together over the next 6 months? And then let's get back together and review it.
Yeah. Yeah. And stick that landing, right? Like actually do it. It's just taking the methods that you encourage us to use that are, out with a buyer, but, carried through inside the organization. And yep. I think that that's kind of a good 360 way to operate. And I agree with you that how it ties to acceleration in my mind is by being so forthright in everything we do, we are moving faster towards those things that we intend. So if a buyer wants to buy from you, you're, by doing so, actually just facilitating them getting there quicker. If that employee needs to leave you, you're facilitating getting that out and getting onboarding the next person. That was my takeaway. I'm not sure if you'd agree.
Yeah, yes, and you can use the same practices internally. The other value of the internal conversations in paired settings or as a team, you remember one of the last chapters of the book, this idea of the whole purpose of playbooks is to build consistency externally so our buyers and customers understand. But internally, if we actually write down, not scripts, but frameworks, how do we message the different buyers? How do we qualify different buyers? We now can actually learn from each other. We're working from the same play, and hey, I tried that question and it landed really well, or I tried that talk track and didn't land well. So the playbooks and that intentional conversation internally allows us all to learn quicker from each other for a very volatile market environment. Things change all the time.
They do, and I think playbooks in particular have that elasticity where they can be used by the person fresh out of school who needs a little bit of help, but can grasp at least some of the early questions that they need to use through to your most senior executive. Playbooks have that universality to them. They're very much made that way. And then moving through from marketing and sales over to customer service, you would argue that by having them all focused on one thing, we're going to reduce friction even in large organizations. What is that one thing that all three teams should be going for?
An easy buyer and customer journey. That's what they should be going for. And we've all experienced this is you have a salesperson you love, right? And they've done a great job of selling the value of the organization. You get handed to somebody on the success or the client services team who says, So tell me why you want to work with us and you want to pull your hair out. Or the other thing that, I mean, literally, we've worked with teams. There's, Burning Glass. I'll mention them because they did a great job of adjusting. But those teams, they talked about their use cases differently, right? So they actually had different language for what workforce development what we ended up standardizing on, or what it meant to work on using their labor market data to support uh, portfolio analysis. They had different terms for that. So a closed customer would show up and the customer success manager is talking to them in Chinese, right? So on the CS side, the reason you start with the value narratives, the value plays, is that now everybody can serve the buyer into being a customer in ways that serves the buyer and customer.
I think some angels just broke out singing when you said that. We have, particularly because we're all on different SaaS tools now, I think it's so easy for us when the question is, do your marketing and your sales and your customer service people have, a workflow? And most companies, hand on heart, will say, absolutely. We spend tons of money to get these integrated systems, and we don't let anybody fall through the cracks. When there is a sales order that's finished, it goes straight into customer service. Everybody, has the handoffs. It's, very clear. There's notifications. And you're coming along and saying, that's all fine and good. But if two parts of the organization use different terminology for the same thing, then the buyer doesn't give a care that your systems talk to each other.
Yeah, 100%. I'd go one step further. So you need to align on the messaging, but I'll go one step further. I've never seen this done well purely electronically.
Excellent point.
You need an analog process for the people that are caring for that account actually to coordinate. Whatever the time, I mean, maybe they cover multiple accounts because they're, unless it's right, but there needs to be some kind of analog process to actually hand things off well. I mean, TrueFit, which is another story in the book, one of the secrets to their kind of dramatic growth success over a period of a couple of years is they had a handoff meeting, and I'm drawing a blank on the name, but it's basically you close something, sales, CS, and product all get on the call.
Yep.
To figure out why did they close, who are the key players, and not just why did they close, but what are all the use cases they might be interested in working on, and what's the order of priority. So it's just basically us handing off well to make sure we get that next phase of the customer journey now off to a good start. And that just isn't going to happen, just trying to communicate all that electronically isn't great. The systems are great to make it easier and more efficient, but you need the systems, you need a common way of talking, and you need a common way of working together, a common way of practicing and learning on customer and buyer accounts.
So that means that senior leadership, whoever is setting the tone here, needs to say no to completely electronic process, to keep those analog points in the workflow. To me, they just acknowledge how the human brain, how we think, how we speak, and how we act.
Yeah, 100%. And Glenn, I would also say, look, we got a massive amount of data on our side in this, right? The 2010s were a so-called period of innovation in sales strategy and methodology. We entered the 2011 when Challenger came out, and it's a really sexy book. We had 7 major methodologies. By the end of that, we had almost 20. Challenger, Insight, Disruptive, GPTC, Anim. I could go on and on of all the new methodologies that came out. The amount of spending on technologies for marketing, sales, and customer success went from 1,500 a head to 4,500 a head. Wow. You know what the results of all of that investment and so-called innovation was?
I don't think it kept pace.
Well, the number of reps on quota went from 58% in 2009 to 42% in 2019. It eked back up to like the low 40s, but it's still below 50%. The number of sales VP tenure went from 36 months to 24 months. So the 2010s was the lost decade of sales because we focused on methodologies that told the seller or the marketing team, teach, tailor, take control. You're in charge. You're the hero of the story. Mistake number one. Mistake number two is we overinvested in technologies that were supposed to automate the human interactions.
Yeah. So drown out the human part. Yeah.
Neither of them worked.
Yeah.
So
which is, and we better heed those lessons. I mean, we ignore them at our peril.
Yeah. I mean, and look, the pandemic was a blessing in a way because all of these, I mentioned Todd Capone. There's a woman I know well, Carol Mahoney, who's written a book called Buyer First, which is in the same spirit of our book. There's a book more on the marketing side called We Ask, You Ask, We Answer.
Marcus Sheridan. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's this genre starting in kind of 2018, 2019 of more buyer first books coming back. And the reality is it's not new. This is the way sales used to be done, but there's a new blend that has to come back, which brings the humanness and the authenticity back. Using, tools can build productivity, but at the end of the day, selling, customer success is about serving the other person. And early books on sales in the early 1900s talked about sales as service, right?
Right.
Got to focus first on serving the other person. All these other things can make you more productive and efficient, but if that's not your focus, you're lost.
Yeah, no, keep the core.
Yeah.
Especially with 100 years plus of, proof behind it. You don't want to just dump that because somebody's got a new tool. For sure. Brent, if people want to find out more about the book or more about Winalytics, your consulting firm, where would we send them?
Yeah, they can just go to the website authenticitywins.com. That's our book landing page, but it's also attached to our main, our consulting page, so they can find out more about us. And would encourage, a lot of times after podcasts, people will reach out on LinkedIn with more questions. Would encourage anybody to reach out to me on LinkedIn. Happy to dialogue via LinkedIn. Happy to jump on a call.
Well, that's awesome. Well, listen, thank you so much for, first off, writing the book and for coming on today to tell us about it.
Yeah, it was a great conversation. Thank you, Glenn.
Thank you. Enjoyed it too. And I'm sure that the listener got a lot out of this. And my hope is that they got even better insight into their sales and marketing and customer service process so that they can make it even better.
Thanks for listening. Follow the show on Twitter @Funnel Reboot. If you like what you have heard today, please consider leaving a review wherever you get your podcasts.